This is my new Star Trek fan fiction. It's entitled Star Trek Strangler. Captain's Log, Stardate 3555, Supplemental. The Enterprise is currently en route to the planet Sirius when an anonymous message was sent to security in reference to a stash of stolen items hidden in plain sight aboard the ship. Commander Spock has been tasked with investigating the alleged theft and is currently meeting with Chief Engineer Montgomery Scott in his office. "What can I do for you, Mr. Spock?" Scott asked nervously. Spock had never been in Scott's office before and wasn't comfortable seeing him sitting on the other side of his desk. "We received an anonymous message that someone in your department is or has been running a theft ring and is storing stolen items in or near the hangar deck," Spock replied. "I am here to investigate." "Stolen item?" Scott asked. "No, I don't think so. And if that were the case, why isn't security investigating? Why are you here?" "The captain asked that I investigate. He didn't explain why," Spock replied. "What kind of stolen items? What are you talking about?" Scott asked. His throat was dry, his face was flushed, and he began to perspire. "The message stated the items were stolen over time from several missions from different planets, beamed aboard and stored," Spock replied. "The message did not include an inventory." "And who did the message say was responsible?" Scott asked. "The message alleges that you were the one responsible," Spock replied. "You and you alone. That is why I wanted to speak to you in your office." Scott tried to fake a laugh. "I'm sorry, Mr. Spock, but your message is a false accusation. I am no thief. Do you have any evidence that anything was stolen? Any reports of missing items? Or is this some witch hunt perpetrated by one of my disgruntled staff?" "I don't know who sent the message," Spock replied. "The encryption was impossible to decrypt." "Do you suspect one of your staff sent the message? Does someone in your department have a reason to accuse you?" "Not that I know of," Scott replied. "I run a tight department, and my staff are dedicated. If one of my people had a problem with me, I'd know about it. And if I were hiding stolen items, you could do a scan and find them without a problem. Have you tried that?" "Of course," Spock replied, "but someone with engineering knowledge could easily hide anything and avoid being detected by the scanner," Spock replied. "Unfortunately, theft has become ubiquitous, and security has been bogged down with investigations. But the captain thinks this case rises to a higher level." "You said you didn't have an inventory. Why a higher level? And what does ubiquitous mean?" Scott asked. "Just because you're a Vulcan doesn't mean you have to use big words. Are you trying to intimidate me?" "Ubiquitous means widespread," Spock replied. Then why not say widespread?" Scott asked. "Let me rephrase for you," Spock replied, annoyed. "Theft has become widespread." "Sounds to me like you have no evidence any theft occurred, and a false accusation made by no one," Scott replied angrily. "Unless you have proof that I did anything wrong, this conversation is over." "Ostensibly, you are avoiding the real issue," Spock replied. "Another big word. What does ostensibly mean?" "In a way that appears or claims to be one thing when it is really something else," Spock replied. "You are avoiding the issue by changing the subject." "You make a fine dictionary, Mr. Spock. I'll give you that. But as far as your investigation is concerned, you can leave my office immediately." "I want to be clear that you will continue to be under investigation until I am satisfied no crime has been committed," Spock stated. "If you indeed have committed a crime, I would advise you to report to me as soon as possible." Spock stood up and left Scott's office with a swoosh of the sliding doors. Scott wiped his brow with his sleeve and took a deep breath. He knew he looked and acted guilty, but also knew Spock had nothing on him, or he'd have been taken into custody. But things changed quickly when less than an hour later, 2 security officers entered the engineering department and escorted Mr. Scott out in restraints. A quick trip down the hall, into the turbo lift, and into the shuttle bay, Scott and the 2 security guards met Spock, who was standing next to a shuttlecraft that was parked in a storage area. 2 other security guards stood next to Spock, along with Dr. McCoy, Chief of Security Dickerson, and Captain Kirk. "What is this all about?" Scott asked. "Why are you treating me like a criminal?" "Open the shuttlecraft," Kirk barked. "Now." "I can't. It's under repair," Scott said. "It has a radiation leak, and the interior is contaminated." "Check it, Dickerson," Kirk said. "Use your tricorder." Dickerson stepped over to the shuttlecraft door and scanned the craft. "Negative for radiation," Dickerson stated. "Can you override the system?" Kirk asked. Dickerson tapped a few buttons on the door and waited for a response. "No response," Dickerson said, looking to Kirk. "Cut the door open," Kirk said. Dickerson pulled his phaser and cut the lock open with a blast of light. The door automatically opened, and Yeoman Rand rolled out and flopped onto the floor dead, with cloth wrapped around her neck. Behind her, on the floor of the shuttlecraft, were a dozen other humanoid beings, all lifeless and stacked like wood. "What in the blazes?" McCoy said in shock. "She's been missing for more than a month." Kirk stepped over to Scott and snapped, "Did you do this?" "No, I have no idea what was in the shuttlecraft," Scott replied. "You have to believe me." "Spock, mind meld him, now," Kirk yelled. "You can't," Scott yelled. "I have rights. I demand a lawyer." Spock stopped in his tracks. "Mr. Scott has rights. He is correct. I can't use the Vulcan mind meld without a court order." McCoy stepped over to the shuttlecraft door and looked at the bodies stacked inside. "Who else is in here? Who else was reported missing?" Spock stood next to McCoy and shook his head in disgust. "I don't see any other Enterprise crew members. The others must be from other planets we've encountered. We may have a difficult time identifying them." "Why?" Kirk asked Scott. "Why did you kill these beings?" "Don't try to pin this on me, Captain," Scott replied. "This was all your idea, and don't try to deny it. I was acting on your orders and doing your bidding." "Nice try, engineer," Kirk snapped back. "Those are the words of a desperate man trying to avoid the hanging tree." "I can prove it," Scott said. "I saved all your communications. You thought I wouldn't report you, but I kept records and recordings. I'm not going down for this alone." "What are you talking about?" McCoy asked. "Why is he implicating you in this?" "Like I said, he is desperate and is placing blame on me," Kirk replied. "I killed Rand because she was pregnant," Scott said with a smile. "You were the father, and you told me to clean up your mess." "Nice try," Kirk replied. "There is no way to prove that." McCoy spoke up. "Actually, there is a way. I can scan Rand and see if she has a fetus. I can do a cross-DNA check and find out who the father is, if the father's DNA is in my database." Kirk stepped back and pulled his phaser from his belt and aimed it towards the group, who were now staring at him in disgust. "There is only one way this is going down, and I am not going to prison." The end of my Star Trek fan fiction. If you like this, go to this link right here. I have a whole playlist, and you can watch all 30 of them. Thank you very much.